59. We're going to get going right on time, so come on in. Keith, are we live? We're live, coming to you live from All Saints Church, Pasadena. Okay. If you didn't realize after 7 years that I have a weird sense of humor, I guess the joke is on you. That's right. I won't even go there. So good to see everybody. Welcome to All Saints Church. I'm really just touched that you are all interested in this. So thank you. My name is Mike Kinman. I'm the rector here. My pronouns are he, him. And this is sort of a different forum. Usually we have, interesting, inspiring people talking about areas of expertise. And I was asked by so many people, please share with us about your trip to India and Nepal. And it was and remains a life-changing experience for me. And I really wanted to do this because I took you all along every step of the way. And it was very intentional. I mean, part of it is I have a prayer list that I literally keep on my phone. And I pray it at least once a day. And the church is on it, and many of you individually are on it. But also just keeping you all on your heart and knowing that you had me on your heart while I was taking this journey. And so just grateful. I was telling some people here, one of my, and I say this lightly, one of my very light childhood traumas was my aunt and uncle coming to visit us after their trip in Hawaii with a tray of slides. And going through their family vacation slides when I was like 6 years old, and I thought this has got to be against the Geneva Convention. And so I'm hoping to at least clear that bar of not have this be better than my aunt and uncle's trip to Hawaii that I had to sit through. So I'm hoping to do that. So and I tend to talk. You might know that about me, and so we'll sort of have some chance for discussion, I hope. I've started with this website, and many of you know Thistle Farms and Becca Stevens, and this is really how this all happened. And Becca and other women from the Thistle Farms community are going to be here on December 3rd, so they're going to make their annual trip here, and they've got great stuff. I want to share this. They have gone and done a project with Homeboy Industries and Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative. And the three of them together are producing these justice candles. And they will be for sale, and the proceeds go to Thistle Farms, Homeboy, and the Equal Justice Initiative. That's got to be the holy trinity of awesomeness, is those three. So anyway, most of you know Becca. Becca began an organization called Thistle Farms. It began 27 years ago as a community of women, residential community of women who were recovering from childhood sexual abuse and exploitation, prostitution, violence, and drug abuse. It developed into an industry called Thistle Farms, where the women achieve economic independence and thriving through making their own products. And in the last decade or so, there's been something called Thistle Farms Global, and that's what Becca has moved into, and she kind of brought me along with her. And I'm on the advisory board for Thistle Farms Global, and what we're doing is we find women's cooperatives all over the world, and there are amazing women's cooperatives all over the world. And we go visit them, we build relationship, and we connect them with one another. I've done a site visit in Ajijic, Mexico with an amazing group of women called Moringa Madres who harvest moringa, which is just this amazing superfood. And then we put that in a tea. We take some tea from Rwanda and put that together in there. And the idea is to create this network where everyone is teaching each other, but it's also promoting this concept that Becca has called shared trade. Now, shared trade is different and frankly much better than fair trade. When you see something that is fair trade certified, it can mean that probably about 10, maybe at best 20% of the money that you're paying is getting back to the people who are producing it. In shared trade, 60% of what is paid for the product on a global market, on a Western market, gets back to the women that produce it. And that's what Thistle Farms does with its shared trade network. And when you can think about 60%, say you buy a scarf for $75. Now that, let's just math is hard. Let's say $50 of that goes to these women for that one scarf. There is nowhere, say it's in Kathmandu, there is nowhere they could sell a scarf like that for that price, because like $50. Like, I'm going to tell you about a bus trip that I took across India. That was $31, for that. This is huge. I mean, and it's money that changes lives and empowers women. And so we have been wanting to take a visit to Nepal. Because there were several women's cooperatives, 2 women's cooperatives, and then one other organization that were there. And so I had a chance, and Becca had asked me years ago to do this, and then COVID happened, and then finally we scheduled it. And I'll show you the team that went on it. Here's the team that went on it. It's hard to see a little bit. I don't know if we can get some lights down in front here. But if you could see us, that is, I'm there with Becca Stevens and Becca's amazing husband, Marcus Humman. Marcus is a award-winning country music singer-songwriter. He is actually, next October, opening on Broadway a play based on the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. And it's amazing. And then 2 bishops, Rob Wright, the Bishop of Atlanta, and Phoebe Rofe, who's the Bishop of West Tennessee. And that was our traveling group. And we worked with 2 different, we visited 2 women's cooperatives and one other. And because what we do is just, you start with relationship and you build relationship. What was interesting, the first one we visited was not a women's cooperative, but they were doing some really amazing work with women, and it was called the Nepal Youth Foundation, and actually the founder of it has been on Oprah and various things. But the work that they were doing, and this really keyed into a lot of the rest of my journey, was about untouchability and about the caste system. Now, the caste system is technically illegal in Nepal. You are not allowed to discriminate on basis of caste. And it still happens, and a large part of the reason it still happens is that the police in Nepal are all of an upper caste. And it is in their interest that the caste system stay in place because they benefit from it. And so the police will not enforce the caste laws, especially in rural villages. Well, so what the Nepal Youth Foundation has done, and these caste laws are, they are incredibly oppressive. And what they realized is they need lawyers who can bring charges against people for these things the police will not enforce. And so Nepal Youth Foundation has gone into these rural communities where the caste system is most active and has gone to girls of the lowest caste and has paid for their preparation for the law school entrance exam and has paid for their entire law school education so that they can become human rights lawyers. So that you have women who are the very people who are being most discriminated against then become the people who are fighting and overturning the law. And the thread that goes through all of that is untouchability happens in so many different ways. It's not just in the caste system in places like India and Nepal. We create our own untouchables when we have people that we refuse to deal with or people that we keep at an arm's length or literally even refuse to touch. I think about there are ways that people who are struggling and living with homelessness in this country can be an untouchable caste. People who are living in incarceration can be an untouchable caste. And some of this is actually like you're not even allowed to touch people when you go into jail. And so we create these things in ourselves. And it was one of the things that Gandhi fought the most about was against untouchability. It's like we cannot say that we should not be ruled by someone else if we, in and of ourselves, are ruling over other people. And so that was one of the first places we went to. There were 2 other women's cooperatives. I only went to one of the other site visits because I got the worst case of food poisoning I'd ever gotten in my life. That was just, don't worry, there are no slides of that. So I was out of commission for a day, but then I came back strong. And we saw this incredible place called Local Women's Handicraft. And local women's handicrafts, it is a lot of girls and young women from these same outer region villages. And if they had stayed there, they would have been married by probably the age of 12 or 13, and their whole life would have been set out in ways that did not allow really for any kind of freedom for them at all. And so this place goes in and literally brings these women out of these villages, teaches them trades, and again, 60% of all the money that comes from these products that are sold, and you'll have a chance to buy some of these on December 3rd at the Alternative Christmas Market, 60% goes back to these women. And like one of the things, and then they also target products that they send back to their villages and give away to help liberate these women. Like one of the things that keeps girls in these villages from going to school is they are not given feminine hygiene products when they start their periods. And so if they are on a period, they cannot go to school because they have to go somewhere. There's sort of a tent that they go to. Well, what they have done is created, you see these sort of strips there. Those are carrying cases for feminine hygiene products. And it's something beautiful that they can have, and they put the products in there, and they give them to the girls, so now they can go to school. And that is some of the products and things like that that they're producing. And so we saw these amazing cooperatives, but a lot of it was also just walking around. We had an amazing guide. Walking around Kathmandu. We never really got outside of Kathmandu. And one of the things that struck me the most was, well, two things that struck me the most. The first is, and I think this is my next, is the way faith is absolutely integrated into daily life. So we would be walking down the street, and this was on, I believe, a Tuesday, and Tuesday is the day of homage for Ganesh in the Hindu religion. And so there is a Ganesh shrine, and it's just open. And people would be, everyone rides motorcycles. And so people would stop their motorcycle, they would go in, they'd make an offering to the shrine just on their way to work. And it was just one of these things that was integrated. And so this was a larger one. There's also just sort of huge, large temples everywhere. And there was a spirituality to the place that I just had to say, I could feel it. You would walk down on a Saturday. We walked down a busy marketplace, and there was, I believe it's called a kirtan group, that was just singing spiritual songs in the marketplace in a way that was not oppressive, in a way that wasn't like proselytizer. It was just, there was just people, it's like, we're going to get together and we're going to sing with joy. It was incredible. And then Nepal is vast majority Buddhist. And Buddhists, of course, will tell you that that is not a religion, it is a practice. And part of what that means is like the next largest group is Hindu, and Hindus and Buddhists exist wonderfully together. And in fact, there were these amazing shrines that had, right here you have the Hindu avatar or icon, and then right above it you have the Buddhist or vice versa. And they shared those spaces beautifully. And so it was sort of faith that was immersed in daily life, but it is also that coexistence that is, I think, what we strive for here at All Saints Church. And it was beautiful to see that put into practice just on really a national level, or at least inside this city. And so I had this opportunity to go on this trip, and it was amazing. And then I realized that, after Becca had invited me and I'd said yes, I said, this is an opportunity, and I don't know when or if I'll ever be in this part of the world again. I'd never been there before. And I realized I wanted to do more. And some of you know this part of my story. I've been interested in nonviolence most of my life. And I was kind of an interesting kid, is a nice, maybe tactful way to put it. When I was in 4th grade, my mom joined, as many of you have heard me say, my mom joined Self-Realization Fellowship Church, whose founder, Paramahansa Yogananda, is from India. And she'd always longed to go to India. And so, as a 4th grader, I was taking Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi to school with me and reading it. And now I'm just sort of like, oh my gosh, my teachers must have been looking at me like, what is going on here? And there's a whole chapter in that book about Yogananda meeting with Gandhi. And so I learned, and I was fascinated with Gandhi. And I really became a disciple of Gandhi before I became a disciple of Jesus. And then in middle school and high school, I got Gandhi's autobiography, and I read most of that. And then my sophomore year of high school, I went to a small school, and they rented out an entire theater, and the whole school went and saw Richard Attenborough's Gandhi, which absolutely, I was hooked at that point, and I began to learn about nonviolence. And if you were here, I did a class at the end of July as sort of nonviolence as a way of life, and that's a lot of what I was learning, and it has absolutely shaped my life, and so I have become so entranced by what Gandhi was able to do in India, not just because he harnessed that power, but because he embodied it. Things like refusing to hate his oppressors, saying to the British very clearly, yes, you will leave, and when you do, I want us to depart as friends. Because he understood that violence as a cycle just begets more violence and more violence. It's why King and James Lawson and Bernard Lafayette and Diane Nash and all these amazing civil rights leaders in this country studied at Gandhi's feet, because he believed in revolutionary love as the most powerful force in the universe. And so I'd always wanted to go to India for me and for my mom. And so when I had the opportunity, I realized, okay, this is once in a lifetime to do this trip. And I want to talk about the trip that I planned and then the trip that actually happened. Because to me, that was actually a big part of it. The trip I'd planned was, okay, I'm going to fly into Delhi. And I invited all my other companions to go with me, and they're like, nope, they weren't interested. And that was actually fun. I would have loved the companionship. Invited you to go with me. Not interested. But it was also just like this was it was a pilgrimage for me, and a lot of it, as I discovered, was a pilgrimage of grief for my mom, but also grief for my dad, and so I was working through a lot of that. So I wanted to start in Delhi, mostly because that's where you sort of fly into from Kathmandu, but also because that was the place where Gandhi was assassinated, and to sort of start at the end. And then take a flight to Gorakhpur, which is in the far eastern part of the country, I guess over here. And that's where Yogananda was born, and I wanted to visit Yogananda's birthplace and leave some of my mom's Kriya beads there for her. But then one of the things that Gandhi did when he got back from South Africa, he started out in South Africa doing amazing civil rights work for Native Indians in South Africa. And as soon as he got back, people wanted to co-opt him into the Home Rule movement in India. And what he said was, no, not yet. He said, I don't know India. And he spent a couple years on the train, 3rd class, traveling through India, staying in slums, because he said, if we presume to be people who will speak for India and free India, then we have to know India and not just the people who sit on soft couches, as Scripture likes to say. And so I thought I wanted to do that. I wanted to take a trip across India 3rd class on the train. And then I would stop in Ahmedabad, which is over on the west part. That's where Gandhi had his ashram for 15 years. That's where he began the Salt March from. And I'm like, I'm going to do 3 days, walk the first 3 days of the Salt March. And I'm going to do that and really get that sense of, in person in the land. And then I'm going to go to Surat and Dandi Beach, where the Salt March ended, and spend some time there. And then I'm going to go to Mumbai and then fly home. And it started out okay. I went to that's autobiography. I went to Delhi, and there's a place called Gandhi Smriti. It's the place where Gandhi was assassinated, and that spot is marked by just this obelisk. It was almost sort of 2001: A Space Odyssey-esque. And it was interesting because I've seen the movie, Richard Attenborough's movie, so many times, and as soon as I walked into the courtyard, I couldn't breathe because that was filmed on location. And it was being in that space. And then I literally was able to take my shoes off and go and lean up against that and meditate, at this spot. And I can't even explain it because Gandhi has been such a central person for me my whole life. Losing words right now, I can't even describe, what that was like. And then they had, and what I loved about the museums that were sort of at all these different places is they were remarkably simple. I'm so used to American museums that have 9 million bells and whistles and CGI and everything. And this was mostly just narrative and reproduction of artifacts and different things, but it was just, every time I went to one of these things, it would tell the story from a slightly different angle. And I just made sure I read every word, and I walked through them slowly, and I discovered so many things. At this one in Delhi, there was a copy of a letter that Gandhi wrote to Hitler. And it was beautiful. Actually, I should have had a slide of it. I have a picture of it, and I can share that later. And it was, he knew what was happening, and he knew he understood what Hitler was doing. And he would not say anyone was beyond hope. And he wrote this letter to Hitler basically asking him to stop what he's doing. And of course, Hitler didn't, but he didn't even give up on Hitler's humanity. And I can, you can look at that and say, well, that was a waste of, pen and ink and paper and postage, except no, it's not. There's something about that even in that moment when someone was doing some of the most inhumane things that you can possibly imagine, it's like, no, I'm not going to give up on your humanity. And so from New Delhi, I took the plane to Gorakhpur, and that's where the wheels kind of came off. And it was actually wonderful, and I had a day that was absolutely not what I expected. And at the end of it, I sat down and wrote about it. And I just want to share with you, it's not very long what I wrote, and it was about 4 o'clock that afternoon as I was sitting in a bus park. I said, some people have asked me why I am doing this trip without guides. It's a fair question. Guides are wonderful. We had a spectacular guide, Anita, in Kathmandu. I learned so much from her and gained a friend. Some trips you absolutely should have guides, and that was one of them. Guides have many jobs. The biggest ones are to get you where you're going and to help you learn along the way. The things they teach you are about what has happened in a place and to explain what is happening in a place. Guides are also to prevent things from happening to you, to keep you from getting hassled or getting lost or even getting hurt, to keep you safe. They're to form some sort of a barrier between what you're visiting and yourself, because safety often involves barriers. When we have no barriers, we can touch each other and we can hurt each other. And so I don't take a guide when I don't want the barrier. And I get that there's all sorts of privilege involved in making that choice, particularly male privilege. But when I want to immerse myself in the other and have to navigate through it on the other's terms, I'll do my homework, but I won't take a guide. So let's take the day I had in Gorakhpur. That day, basically nothing went as planned the way it would if I had a guide. See, if I'd had a guide would have picked me up at the airport and taken me to the birthplace of Yogananda. Then the guide would have taken me to the train station and made sure I got on my train, because the guide would have made sure when my train was canceled, I got a seat on the other one before it filled up. The guide would have given me the exact experience I had planned, and it would have been great, and very little probably would have happened that I didn't plan, and I never would have been anxious, and I never would have felt unsafe or unsure, but I didn't have a guide. So when I got to India, I still didn't have the exact address of Yogananda's birthplace, because nobody in the US or online knew it, and they said, oh, you just contact the Yogada Satsanga Society, which is SRF in India. When I get there, they'll be able to tell me. Okay, well, when I got off the plane, the first thing I discovered is Uber doesn't work as well in Gorakhpur as in Delhi. So instead of having a secure air-conditioned car pick me up and take me to the birthplace, I got in what's called a tuk-tuk, a motorized covered scooter, which I said, take me to, I picked a local American chain hotel because I figured, okay, I can have a bite to eat there, but then also maybe there's someone who speaks English there who can help me out. And so I went there and I had to make friends with people at the counter where I wasn't a customer and spoke only a little English. And because of their kindness, they were able to help me to discover that the number I had for the Yoga to Satsanga Society didn't work. And they directed me to another covered scooter, another tuk-tuk, and in Hindi showed the driver where I needed to go from the map with the non-functional Uber app on my phone. Because I didn't have a guide, I didn't realize the driver had no real idea where he was taking me. He just saw me and said, I am not losing this fare. And so after about 10 minutes of driving, which sort of by my GPS I could say, I think this is in the right direction, he stops and takes my phone and asks a friend for directions. And then he does this a second time and a third time. And all the time I'm trying to help him with maps and gestures because we do not speak one word of the same language other than the price we'd agreed on. Because I didn't have a guide, I got that experience so many people have when they arrive in this country for the first time. And that is not only being the only person who looks like them, but not speaking a word of the language. I had that feeling of powerlessness, even from my obviously privileged position, and I had the anxiety that my privileged position might make me a target for robbery or fraud. Because I didn't have a guide, I finally told my driver, pull over, kind of gestured. I paid him the full price, and I got out and I started to walk back to the hotel, and I was then able to walk along the edges of open sewers and past cows and shops and countless people, some of them women in colorful dresses riding side saddle on motorcycles. And because I didn't have a guide, I got to sweat and sweat and sweat and began to wonder if I'd made a mistake getting out of the covered scooter. And I was able to be grateful that I was having an experience I would never have in a tour, and that I was seeing people in a neighborhood that might never have seen someone with my color skin except once in a long while. At least they stared at me that way. And when people asked me where I was from and I said America, they smiled and said, ah. And two said big country. And one said powerful country. And I said India. And I gestured around and smiled, beautiful country. And they smiled and nodded. Because I didn't have a guide, I had to guess which scooter driver had the best shot at getting me back to the hotel so I could regroup. And I guessed well, and I felt that joy. Because I didn't have a guide, I had to work with the hotel staff with little English to try to figure out where exactly the bus I was taking instead of the train was to pick me up. And it was near an abandoned gas station, something that sounded a little sketchy at best. And then with a driver who spoke no English, direct him with my phone to the place and show my ticket to 3 different people who finally guided me to the place where I was going to meet my bus. And because I didn't have a guide, I got to attract the looks and attention of 2 beautiful children when I pulled out my iPad and started to write what I'm reading to you right now because they'd never seen anything like this before. And I was able to point to myself and say Mike, and then point to a map and show them I was from Los Angeles, and another person was able to translate and help them understand, and I was able to remember that a smile is part of a universal language and that children are children everywhere. Guides are wonderful. If I'd had a guide, I would have had a great day and seen Yogananda's birthplace and not been anxious at all or had one moment of uncertainty that I was going to get where I was supposed to be going. But because I didn't, I got an adventure. Instead of seeing a place, I got to experience it in ways very few tourists do. I got to meet people and feel powerless and get a sense of their daily lives. I got to sit on a stone staircase and smell urine and see piles of trash and watch cows stroll by and see teenagers giggle and children look at me with wonder and others with great suspicion. For 6 hours, instead of just being a tourist, I got a little closer to being a local, and in my linguistic hopelessness, I got to experience the grace of so many people who had such patience with me that I pray I will remember the many, many times the roles are reversed back here. And I got to thinking that's incarnation, that's beloved community, and that most of life doesn't have guides. It's the stuff that happens when we have to make our way. It's living without a net, which is what most people can't help, but that I get most of the time to choose. It's really what happened here when we opened our campus up to anyone who needed a place when the shelters closed for COVID. It's a step towards what Greg Boyle talks about when he invites us to gather on the margins until the margins disappear under our feet. And that's why Gandhi did what he did, taking a train third class through India and living in slums. He was seeking wisdom and beauty, and he found it. And that's why the symbol of the revolution in India was a spinning wheel and not a sword. Because when he got into these communities, he realized that part of what the British Empire had done with them is it had taken not just their autonomy, but their pride in what they could create. And he helped the entire country it was called Swaraj, which is making your own stuff. He had everyone discard all the cloth they had gotten from Britain. And he actually went to Birmingham in England and met with the textile workers who were hurt by this boycott. And they cheered him on because they understood what he was doing. And the symbol of this entire movement where this country overthrew an empire was a spinning wheel. It is si se puede. It is yes, we can. It is this is what we do. We are going to be a revolution that is run on love and our own labor for one another. And so instead of getting on a train, there's a tuk-tuk, I got on a bus. And this was a luxury bus for India. And it was a space maybe is smaller than this carpet, definitely, about sort of half the size lengthwise and not quite as wide. And I took this bus all the way across India from Gorakhpur to Ahmedabad. It was 36 hours, including a 6-hour layover in the one place where even the GPS on my phone wouldn't work. And that was an immersion experience. And it was amazing because I was the only person on the bus who spoke English, and there was no bathroom on the bus. You had to sort of wait. And so I was, especially after my Nepal adventure, I was very careful about what I ate. But it was an amazing experience, and the holiest piece of it, in part, it was just watching the country go by and hearing the people. But around 12:30 in the morning, I woke up, just happened to wake up, and the Holy Spirit nudged me awake. And it was just as we were crossing the Ganges River. And this was the only time I was going to be near that river, that incredibly holy place, for the entire trip. And so I got to just look out the window as we crossed, and I just snapped this picture. And realizing that and part of this is me living close to the Mississippi for 20 years, as you realize when you're a river town and a river people that the river is life. There's a part of our psalm today, there's a river that makes glad the city of God. There is something about the river that brings life, and that was beautiful. And then I went from there and stopped in Ahmedabad. And Ahmedabad is on the west coast of India, on the Sabarmati River. And this is the place where every morning and every evening Gandhi would gather with their community and do their morning and evening prayers. I was not prepared for what this place would mean to me. I really don't have words to describe it, except as soon as I walked in, I felt like I was home. And especially when I walked into this place, and I spent so much time meditating and praying for many of you by name in this space. I actually keep this as the lock screen on my phone and on my iPad, because when I'm getting stressed out, it helps me return to that place of peace. The ashram is open 24/7. It is no longer functioning, but you can go there anytime. I stayed at a hotel the first night about 700-800 yards from there. And when I finally did have to leave, and I think I preached about this a little bit, as I was walking out, I just started to cry. And I'm not someone who's been able to cry a lot recently. And it was just this release. And I knew that someday I had to go back. It was amazing. And then I thought, okay, this is where the Salt March started. I'm going to walked the first 3 days of the Salt March. And for those of you who don't know, this was one of the largest acts of civil disobedience in human history. The only way you could buy salt, and we need salt to live, is with a huge tax from the British Empire, and you were not allowed to make your own salt. You only could buy it heavily taxed from the British. And so they said, we're going to do what was about a 30-day march to the sea. And they started out with 60 or 70 people, and they ended up with 10,000. And they just walked from village to village, and at the end, at Dundee Beach, there were 10,000 people who made salt, and then they sold it on the streets of the city. And it was an incredible act of courage, and it was an incredible act of claiming the power that is rightfully every human being's. And the other thing that he did is he walked through, this is part of how he got to know India, and India got to know him. And so I started off the first day, prayed at 6:30, started off right where he was, and I walked through all these different neighborhoods. And Ahmedabad, like many places, is very segregated. Gandhi died believing he'd been a failure. And actually, if you look at the history of Gandhi and all the different campaigns he did, he failed way more than he succeeded. And even the ones he succeeded, like freeing India, he believed he'd failed because India got partitioned into India and Pakistan. And in fact, the reason Gandhi was assassinated was he was about to go to Pakistan to try to look at what reconciliation could look like with the Muslim people. And it was a Hindu extremist who killed him because he thought that he had given too much away in the partition negotiation, and he was afraid he was going to go there and give out more. And again, there was something, and many of you who have been to places like this will know this, and I was walking along. Just hear the music. Just walking and hearing that music in the morning, this call of prayer. And I'll be walking through Hindu neighborhoods, I'd be walking through Muslim neighborhoods. I forgot to wear these. Maybe you've seen me with them before. I was wearing my mother's SRF Kriya yoga beads, which would identify me, if anything, as Hindu. They wouldn't identify me, but certainly as Muslim. Maybe someone would think they were Roman Catholic. And India is going through a very hard time right now. We have a problem with Christian nationalism in this country. There's a problem with Hindu nationalism happening in India. And in fact, in some of the northern provinces where there's a heavily Muslim population, there is a lot of oppression and there's people striking back. So there is a lot of Muslim-Christian growing polarization and hostility happening in England. And at one point, I was walking through a Muslim neighborhood, and I think I preached, I don't know if I preached about this or not, but a young man in, I'm bad at this, I think his early 20s, walked up to me and stood just this close to me, and I could see pain and anger in his eyes, and he looked at me, and he just said, "Death to Krishna," and then he walked on. And I was startled, and a little scared because I didn't know what was going to happen. And the intensity of his anger and his pain was so much. And once I'd recovered, I wish we could have a conversation. But of course the moment has passed. I don't even know, how much English he spoke, and I certainly didn't speak, any other language. But it was that sense of the deep pain and hurt of that division, and that even as I was taking this pilgrimage, I was seen as an intruder. I was there trying to learn and be changed. And I realized, and what I'm doing, and even the way I'm identifying myself, is like I'm seen as an intruder. And I've sat with that. I'm not really even quite sure what to make of that, except I'm sitting with that experience. And then this is the other place where my journey changed, because when Gandhi took this journey, it was pretty much all rural. And now it's getting close to 100 years later, and it is all urban. And it's all a lot like this that you see. The other thing, which I should have recognized earlier, is that Gandhi took his trip in March, and I was doing mine in August. It was hot. And so I thought, this isn't supposed to be penitential. And I looked at the next 2 days on the map, and I realized, this walking is pretty much going to be the same. And also it takes a lot longer to get around than I thought, and so I think I was a little too ambitious. And so instead, I went back to Ahmedabad, and I spent an extra day or so at the ashram. And I just let myself be in that space. And it's like, I'm going to care for my body, and I'm going to just be in this space. And I'm so glad that I did that. That was such holy time. And then I took a train. I did get to get on a train. Took a train down to Surat, which is on the coast, and then took a car out to Dandi Beach, which is where the Salt March ended. And again, there was a great museums there, but this is Dandi Beach. And I walked out, on there, and it was an experience like when I went to the Western Wall, and it sort of felt like it had an energy field on the Temple Mount. I walked on this beach, and I could feel the energy of 10,000 people making salt. I don't know other way to say that. It was just being, and I think maybe we've all had this experience where we go to a place where something momentous happened. And it was sort of like I felt when I walked into the place where Gandhi was killed, but it was also just, it was so far beyond that. It was just the energy and the power was there, and I walked into the ocean, which was as warm as you can possibly imagine. It was amazing, and I washed my mother's Kriya beads in the ocean. And I picked up a few stones to just have and hold with that. But it was just this sense of this is the spot where a people claimed their humanity and their dignity and their identity and the power of doing it together. And it was absolutely incredible. And so as I've thought about what the takeaways are from this, and from there, I took a train to Mumbai and spent a day there. And then in one of the biggest cases of whiplash I've ever had in my life, I went from Mumbai to Dubai and spent a day with a friend in like the most opulence you could ever, and that really was just sort of like, whoa. I was like walking through a slum in Mumbai, and the next day I'm like at an infinity pool looking at the Byrd Khalifa. It's like, this is a problem. But I think about the takeaways that I have, and especially coming back here into the polarization that we're facing as a country and as a nation. And how do we disagree with each other? How do we fight for justice? And still respect do not demonize the people, respect the dignity of every human being. I am so deeply grateful that I got to take this trip before October 7th, when Hamas attacked and when Israel has responded, because it has absolutely convinced me that, yes, I believe we need a ceasefire. We have to stop the killing, and I absolutely have to literally sit with my Jewish siblings who disagree. And listen to them and be with them in their pain, because if we are going to get anywhere, we're going to get there together. And what is just killing me is the number of people who are trying to force us to hate each other when we don't. We love each other. I think about that young man who said death to Krishna, and I hold him on my heart. And I know that we are creating people like that here. And I know that people who believe as I believe are part of creating people like that here. That there are fundamentalisms and extremes on both the left and the right. And whenever we have a sentence that starts death to anyone, then there's a wound that needs healing. And then finally, what I began to wonder as I was walking, and I was walking on that trip from the first day of the Salt March, and I was walking through various places, and as I was walking without a guide, I was getting to know neighborhoods and people halfway around the world in ways that I don't know my own neighborhood here? What if we walked from here to St. Barnabas Church? What would we learn? The distance I walked that day was about 3 hours, 4 hours, felt like 10 hours. What if we walked from here to the Midnight Mission? What would we learn? What if we walked from here to fill in the blank? What would we learn? I really think that's something I want to do. I want to invite us to do, is to say we live in this car culture, and believe me, I think nuclear winter couldn't kill the car culture in Los Angeles. What I'm wondering, though, is as we're able, can we walk and roll, for those of us who need assistance? Can we take some of these journeys and be open to the sounds and the people that we're going to meet on the way? And maybe replace some of the caricatures and assumptions that we have in our minds and our hearts about each other with reality. And also realize that as we do this, we may be seen as intruders. And we may have people saying, "Get off our lawn," or "Get away." And we may run into misunderstanding. But I'm coming to believe that that's not a reason not to do it. It's a reason to try to respond with love. And so I hope this was more interesting than my aunt and uncle's slide tray to Hawaii. I walked away from this with so many questions, not a lot of answers, but really believing even more than I ever had in the power of radical nonviolent resistance to oppression, and the power that everything has to be done. I'll end where I start. Everything has to be done with what Becca says over and over again, which is love heals. Everything we look at, locally, nationally, globally, the only answer I know of is love heals. And that's what we've been trying to live for a long time here at All Saints Church. And that's what we're going to keep doing. And so I've run out of time. I really apologize. Keith, I know you've got to get moving because it is 9:46. I want to thank you for being with me. Even though I talked the whole time, I hope this will be the beginning or the continuing of a conversation. And please, I'm happy to meet with you individually and just sort of keep talking about this. But thank you so much for your kind attention this morning. Thank you.